Hi, boys and girls. This is Grandma Sheila again with another story for you. It's called Nearest His Heart. Well, Benny sat beside his grandfather in church. You know, sometimes, even boys of 9, it's hard to sit quietly, but not today, because the minister that was preaching today was a missionary from Africa. And he was telling them all about his work in Africa. And he put out a question. He said, "Boys and girls, why do you think the children in America have everything, but the little children in Africa only get the poor things in life?" Benny thought about that. That was a whole new thought for him. And it wasn't that Benny had lots, because he had been orphaned when he was little, and he'd come to live with his grandma and grandpa. And sometimes, financially, things were hard. But Benny had one thing. And he stopped and he was listening very intently to the minister again. He had both hands up holding his head. Oh, he couldn't believe how hard it must be for little boys in Africa not to have anything to play with. And some of them didn't even have proper clothes. And then the minister said, one of the greatest things that a mommy or daddy or a little boy or girl could do would to be give something that's nearest to your heart for others, just like Jesus had done. And Benny thought about that. Boy, this was a hard one. The minister said, sacrifice is very important, because when you sacrifice something, someone else gets a blessing. And Benny sat there and he looked down and he thought, what could he give? He didn't have anything to sacrifice, he didn't think. But then all of a sudden it came to him, just like a big flash of light. He could give Rex. Now, Rex was his dog. It was a German Shepherd police dog, and he'd had Rex for about 2 years. He'd gotten him when he was 7, and he'd loved him ever since. He basically was his only pal and his constant companion. And he thought, nearest and dearest to my heart, I could give Rex. I could give Rex for one of those little boys in Africa. Wouldn't that make a little boy happy? Well, he was thinking all this in his head because he still had to be quiet, because the minister was still preaching, and he had kind of gone overtime. But finally, the final song came, talked about, what have you given to Jesus? Benny felt better, because down deep inside, he knew he had something he could sacrifice, something that he could give. Soon the final prayer was done, and Benny held his grandfather's hand, and they walked out of the church. He shook hands with the minister. He was happy now, because he had a plan. He had something to give to the little boys and girls in Africa. Well, all the way home, Grandpa didn't have very good eyesight anymore, and so he didn't notice that all of a sudden, when they'd come out of the church, well, Rex had a habit of going to church every weekend with Grandpa and Benny, and he would sit outside the church. So, of course, when Benny came out of the church, oh, Rex was so excited. He jumped and he knew he wasn't supposed to bark. So he just tried to be quiet and contain his excitement. And he got up under Ben's hand and he nuzzled his head under it. And then Rex realized what it meant to sacrifice something. He would be giving Rex away forever. Oh, and as he led Rex home, the closer he got home, the sadder he got. But Grandpa didn't see. When they went in the house, Grandpa said, "We're home, Mother." Now, Grandma had been sick for years, and she stayed in her little bedroom. Her little voice called out to Grandpa. She said, "You were gone longer than usual." And Grandpa said, "Yes, there was a missionary here today, and he had a lot to tell us about the needs of the little boys and girls in Africa. Kind of stirred my heart." Grandma said, "Oh." Grandpa said, "I'll get dinner going." So he went in the kitchen, and they had an old wood stove that they used to cook on. Well, Rex's place, when he wasn't with Benny, was he would go behind that warm wood stove, and he'd take his naps there. Well, Grandfather got busy and got their simple meal made. He put it on the table. Well, Rex was not supposed to beg at the table, but Rex would kind of sneak over so Grandpa wouldn't see him, and he'd get down underneath. So he was basically kind of under the edge of the tablecloth, so Grandpa wouldn't see him. Well, sometimes Benny would sneak him little bites of food and he'd put it down. Nobody noticed that Benny was doing anything. But today, this was the first time in Benny's 9 years of life that he suddenly wasn't hungry. He looked at Rex and he thought, what am I going to do without him? So when Grandpa wasn't looking, bite by bite, the food off of his plate, including his cornbread, disappeared under the table, and a grateful Rex quietly gobbled it up. Well, when the meal was over, it was time to do the dishes. There weren't many dishes, because while Benny and Grandpa had been eating, one of the ladies from the church had brought over special food for Grandma, thinking she would like something. And so they'd sat Grandma up, and she had eaten her dinner in that little room. Benny, he was lost in thought. It was hard to give away the thing that was nearest and dearest to your heart. That was hard. But he didn't know what else to do. He knew that that was what the minister meant. That was what he should do. He knew that. My, what was he going to do? He went over and he helped Grandpa wipe the dishes. Grandpa washed them and he dried them and put them in the cupboard. Pretty soon, that little task was all done, and Benny ran outside. Now, Grandpa had gone over to his favorite chair in the living room, and he had sat back, and before long, Grandpa was busy sleeping away the afternoon. This was his usual nap time. Benny, he sat on the front porch. He had his arm around Rex. Oh, nice Rex. Oh, how can I give you away? Oh, how? Oh, Rex. Oh, oh, you're such a good doggy. And Rex, Rex could sense that there was something wrong. Benny, he looked at Rex. Then he decided to go for a walk. And Benny couldn't go for a walk without Rex with him. Rex was always there to protect him and to comfort him. Well, they went out and they walked down the street in that little town that they lived in. And when they went to cross the street, Benny stopped dead still in the middle of the road. And he suddenly realized, I've told God that I'm going to give Rex away. And the reality of it hit him. All of a sudden, there was the honking of a horn and the squeaking of tires. And Rex went up right behind Benny and pushed him out of the way. The man in the car looked at him and he rolled his window down. You need to stay out of the middle of the road. You're going to get ran over. And Rex, he had turned around and he looked at the man and he barked. Benny, he realized that it was the right thing to do. And Rex didn't have any idea where Benny was taking him. But for a long time, there had been a dog trainer in town, and he absolutely loved Rex. And he wanted him. And he had come around lots of times and had said to Benny, don't you want to sell Rex? I'll pay you good money for him. I can train him to do all kinds of things. But Benny had always said, he's not for sale. He's mine. Well, 2 years before, when Benny was 7, there had been a car that had pulled up when Benny was playing out in Grandpa's front yard, and a lady had gotten out, and she had a tiny, tiny little puppy in her hands. And she looked at Benny and she said, I'm taking this puppy to my mother for a present, but he keeps getting sick in the car. I guess he's car sick. Can he run around your yard for a little bit? Well, Benny said, of course he can play in my yard. So the lady put him down in the grass, and that little puppy started running around and was much happier than in that car. And as the lady watched, she saw how gentle and tender and kind Benny was. She made a decision. She went over to Benny and she said, would you be willing to take care of him? His name is Rex. Would you be willing to take care of him for a week? And I'll pay you for taking care of him. Well, Benny was so excited about the thought of a puppy of his very own. He said, I'll take real good care of him. I promise. And the lady had smiled. She said, I know you will. Well, that week flew by. And before Benny knew it, the lady came back to collect her puppy. And Benny knew that Rex didn't belong to him. So he gathered up little Rex and he kissed him goodbye. And he gave him to the lady into her arms. But the lady had been watching. She'd watched Benny very carefully, how gently and how reluctantly she had given Rex back to her. And as she was walking to her car with Rex in her arms, she thought, this little boy needs Rex much more than my elderly mother does. And she turned around and she said, Benny, would you like to keep Rex for your very own? And he went, my very own? And she said, yes, he can be all yours. And Benny's arms went out. Oh, come here, Rex. And she put Rex back in his arms, and she drove away. And Rex or Benny had not seen that lady ever again since then. But now Rex and Benny were on their last walk together. But Rex didn't know that. But Rex could sense that there was something wrong with his Benny, and he didn't know what it was, and he didn't like it. And he thought, oh dear, what can I do for my Benny? And he tried nuzzling really close to Benny's legs, and he tried barking happily like, chase after me, come play a game with me, Benny. But Benny was too sad to play games. And finally they came to the place where the dog trainer lived. The man, he was generally gruff with little boys, but he'd always liked Rex so much that he would let Benny come around and look at the other dogs. And he said, well, hi, Benny. And Benny realized he needed to say what he had to say quick, because if he didn't, he would never be able to leave Rex there. He looked at the dog trainer and he said, sir, do you still want to buy Rex? And the man, he looked at Benny and he said, I thought you said you never wanted to sell him. I didn't want to sell him. But, and then the story kind of tumbled out. I was in church, and there was a missionary there, and the missionary told me all about the little black boys in Africa, and how they only got poor things. And the minister told us we should only give the thing that's dearest and closest to our hearts. And I thought I didn't have anything to give. And then I remembered Rex. And I thought some little boy in Africa would love to have Rex with him. But Grandpa had told me that they have too many dogs in Africa to take care of. They wouldn't need Rex. I have to have something to give. So I thought maybe you would buy him. Then I could give the money to the minister. Could you give me money today? Benny was thinking, the sooner he got that money to the missionary, the better off it would be. Well, the dog trainer, he reached in his pocket, he pulled out his wallet, and he took out a bill. Well, Rex was a valuable dog, and he knew that he wasn't giving Benny anywhere near the amount of money that Rex was worth. But he thought, that little boy is going to be back first thing in the morning for his dog. He's not going to leave him here. So let's just use a little bit of money, and then he won't have so much to give back to me. Well, Benny looked at that money that the man gave him, and he stuffed it in his pocket. And he reached down and he looked at Rex. He said, "Oh, Rex! Oh, Rex!" And then he closed his mouth tightly, and he said, "Now, you be a good boy. This is going to help some poor little boy in Africa. You understand, Rex?" But Rex didn't understand. And the man took Rex over, and he put him in one of his cages where his dogs stayed while he was training them. And Rex, he didn't like it one tiny bit. Benny was outside that cage, and he couldn't get to him, and he started to bark and bark and bark and bark. And Bunny, he turned around. He couldn't listen to him. He couldn't listen to this. And he started running toward home for blocks and blocks and blocks as he ran. He could hear Benny barking, and the barking getting further and further and further away till he couldn't hear Rex anymore. When Benny reached the house, he went immediately, and he crawled under the stove where Rex always lay. And he didn't make a sound, but the tears ran slowly down each cheek until there was a little puddle on the linoleum floor. But he didn't make a sound. And finally, he went to sleep. Well, Grandpa woke up from his nap just when the sun was setting, and he went, "Benny, Benny, come, we've got to go do the chores." Now, they didn't have many chores. They had one cow to milk, and they had some chicken to feed and to put away in their chicken house. Benny scrambled up, and he ran to Grandpa. Well, they went out into the barn, and they milked the cow, and Benny went to take care of the chickens, and he threw feed out for them. And once they had eaten their fill, he corralled them into the chicken coop, and he shut the door securely so nothing could get the chickens. But it was one unhappy little Benny that did it. He didn't play with the chickens or pet them tonight. And when he went back through the barn, Grandpa was done milking the cow and had gone inside. When Benny got in the kitchen, he noticed by that stove there was always a bowl, and every time Grandpa milked the cow, he would put milk in there for Rex. And Benny saw that dish of milk, and he started to cry. "Oh, Rex! Oh." Grandpa said, "What's the matter, Benny?" And then the whole story came tumbling out. "I sold Rex to the dog trainer so that I would have some money for the missionary, for the boys in Africa. The minister had said that we needed to give what was nearest and dearest to our hearts, and Rex was the only thing that was near and dear. After we're done with supper, I'm going to run over to the minister with the money." Grandpa was shocked, but Grandpa, he also knew that Benny was doing the right thing. He wasn't giving some old, worn-out thing. You know, the minister had been very careful when he talked to all the boys and girls and to the people there at the church. He'd said, oftentimes as a missionary, when we get those long-awaited boxes with things to help the people where we're serving, we get old, worn-out clothes. We get toys that are broken, that they're of hardly any use to the people there. Give your dearest and best to Jesus to help others. And Grandpa knew that that was exactly what Benny had done. So he comforted Benny, but he didn't tell him that he had done the wrong thing, because in Grandpa's heart, he knew that Benny had made a great sacrifice for Jesus. Well, as soon as dinner was over, and Benny hadn't hardly eaten anything, and now he didn't have Rex under the table to give his food that he didn't want to eat to. He ran up the stairs and he crawled in bed and he pulled the covers over his head and he cried himself to sleep. When morning came, there was no Rex to greet Benny. After not eating any breakfast but helping Grandpa with the dishes, Benny started outside. And when he got to the gate, there was Rex jumping up and down, barking happily. And you know, in Benny's mind, he forgot that Rex didn't belong to him anymore. He was so glad to see him. Oh, Rex, oh, you're back. But, oh, but you're not mine anymore. And then he looked up, and there stood the dog trainer, and he said, you want him back? And Benny stood up big and tall, and he said, no, I need to help the boys in Africa. That old, gruff dog trainer, he looked at Benny, and he just shook his head. He said, that minister must have had some really powerful things to say to make you be willing to give up a dog as wonderful as Rex. And then he got down right in front of Benny and he said, you just keep that money, give it to the minister for the boys in Africa, and you can have Rex back. He needs you, and you need him. And you know what? I've not been a very God-fearing man in my life. I'm thinking maybe I should go to your church and learn about a God that you're willing to give your nearest and dearest to. And he turned around and he walked away. Oh, Benny said, oh, Rex, you're back. Oh, boys and girls, it's true that when we give to Jesus and we give to help people in other parts of the world, that we need to give the nearest and dearest to our hearts, because God the Father, that's what he did. He gave the nearest and dearest to his heart, and that was Jesus. Thank you, boys and girls. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.